And Antoinette, I believe you're with us. Will you guys both just unmute and say hello so we can check your audio?
Good morning.
Okay, excellent. I think we can hear you both well. And Commissioner Purcell, will you do the same?
Yes, I'm happy. Good to see you all.
Great. Thank you so much. I think with that, we can convene our meeting. So the first item on the agenda was to continue our annual legal review. Will, third time's a charm. Maybe this time we'll let you get through it.
We shall see. Good morning, everyone. And commissioners, thank you for being here. Okay. We just have a few more cases to cover today in the presentation. The first one is Rollins versus Levy Place. It's case number 19C 1221. It is filed in the Davidson County Circuit Courts, May of 2019. Here you have a premises liability case wherein the plaintiff, a babysitter of the leaseholder at MDHA property, Levy Place, alleges that Levy Place failed to maintain the yard and allowed a hidden depression hole, so to speak, to exist. And so the complaint goes, the plaintiff allegedly stepped into the hole and suffered an ankle injury. Our counsel is Warren Smith of the law firm of Smith & Tompkins here in Nashville. He did some work on this. He investigated the matter, and he determines that the area where the injury was alleged to occur is actually right-of-way property in between the sidewalk and the street, owned by the metropolitan government, rather than MDHA or Levy Place LP, which is the tax credits LIHTC entity that was formed for tax credit purposes to own Levy Place when it received the 9% tax credit a few years back. As a result of that, the metropolitan government was brought in as a co-defendant in this matter. And then another original defendant, in addition to Levy Place LP, is Five Star Lawn Maintenance. They were hired by Levy Place LP to provide mowing and lawn care at Levy Place. The opposing counsel in this matter is Tim Bowden. He is an attorney out of Goodlettsville, Tennessee, nearby. According to the complaint, the damages claimed by the plaintiff are $1 million. This, like all the other matters we've reviewed thus far, the facts have not been developed. There has not even been a trial date set in this matter. Right now, the parties are exchanging documents, and I believe no positions, no interviews of any of the parties have been set, but those will be the next steps. So right now, it's still early. The damages alleged are $1 million, and is a premises liability case. And MDHA brought in the metropolitan government as a co-defendant on the basis that the place where the injury was alleged to occur appears to be right-of-way owned by the metropolitan government. Okay. The next case, Knapp versus the metropolitan government. It's extremely difficult to summarize this one, to give this board a presentation on this, because 600-page complaint. The allegations meander every which way. It's very difficult when reading the complaint to discern really what's going on with it. But it appears The complaint appears to emanate from the plaintiff's eviction, which took place in the year 2018 from MDHA Lytech Property Ramen Lofts over at Rolling Mill Hill. MDHA is not involved in management decisions at Ramen Lofts. MDHA doesn't manage the property, so MDHA wouldn't have been involved in any decision to terminate a tenancy at Ramen Lofts. Freeman Webb is the management agent. Plaintiff appears to assert that his and perhaps one or two other evictions were contrary to the low-income housing tax credit standard of good cause that comes from the tax credit statutes, good cause for terminating tenancies or declining to renew tenancies once a 12-month term has expired. Mr. Knapp's eviction had a full hearing, a full trial that went to General Sessions Court in June of 2018, and it was heard by the General Sessions Judge Diane Turner. It had a full hearing. Freeman Webb's reasons for issuing the eviction were heard. Mr. Knapp's defenses were heard, all together. And at the conclusion of the presentation of both parties' evidence, the conclusion of the trial, Judge Turner upheld the eviction, again, in favor of Freeman Webb, not MDHA. MDHA wouldn't be involved. But the judge upheld the eviction. Plaintiff at that moment had a full panoply of appeal rights. He could have filed an appeal within 10 days to go to the next level of trial court, circuit court, which basically would have resulted in an entirely different trial. He could have done that. He chose not to. The window of opportunity for filing that appeal came and went, and no further appellate rights were exercised with respect to the eviction. Our legal counsel, we have really two attorneys on this one. I'll explain why. Tom Feeney with the law firm of Feeney and Murray in Nashville, Tennessee, is representing a certain number of defendants. I'll call them the MDHA defendants. Ryman Lofts at Rolling Mill Hill Limited Partnership, the tax credits entity that was formed to own Ryman Lofts, MDHA affiliate entity, but it's a separate entity that's required for tax credit purposes, was also named as a defendant in the lawsuit. It is being represented by Andrew Gardella of the law firm of Martin Tate in Nashville, Tennessee. When I say the MDHA defendants, the following persons or entities were named as defendants: the MDHA Board of Commissioners, our executive director, Mr. Harbison, Emily Thaden, our director of affordable housing, Will Biggs, yours truly. I was named as a defendant in the lawsuit. The Metropolitan Government as its own entity. Mayor David Briley, who was mayor at the time. Adrian Bond Harris, who was the director of affordable housing. I may have that office incorrect, but she's no longer with the Metropolitan Government. Names. City Real Estate Advisors. That is the limited partner that is involved in the transaction. They bought the tax credits that MDHA was awarded. So the MDHA entity, Ryman Lofts, Inc., is in the limited partnership with City Real Estate Advisors to own Ryman Lofts. Freeman Webb, the management agent, several Freeman Webb principals, including Bill Freeman, Kirby Davis, the chief of operations, Judy Beasley, their general counsel, Rod Beverstein. Then you have the property manager at Ryman Lofts, as well as a maintenance employee. Offices of Hall and Associates, that is the law firm that Freeman Webb engaged to perform the eviction hearing at General Sessions Court, which we went over, and then the two attorneys at that law firm, Mr. Wes Hall, Nathan Liebarger. Several motions to dismiss have been filed by every single party on the basis that, one, the complaint itself, 600 pages of allegations, including 400 pages of filed exhibits, 1,000 pages in total, violates Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 8, which requires that any complaint filed in federal court be a short and plain statement of the relief requested. When you file something in federal court, you have to file the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Any document you file, any discovery you request, it has to follow all these rules. Rule 8, very simply, requires that any complaint filed in federal court be short and be plain. And the 600-page complaint that appears to emanate from hearing and alleges, I believe, 23 separate defendants is neither short nor plain. That's number one, the first basis upon which the motions to dismiss have been filed. The second is the federal Rooker-Feldman doctrine. Under the Rooker-Feldman doctrine, if you have what's essentially a state court matter, such as an eviction, and you try to file in federal courts a state court matter that ultimately should have been filed in state court, under the Rooker-Feldman doctrine, the federal court does not have jurisdiction to hear that matter. And as I mentioned earlier, to the extent the complaint emanates from his eviction, and it appears to emanate wholly, he had appeal rights in state court that the plaintiff could have exercised but chose not to. And for failing to do so and choosing instead to go the federal court route, violates Rooker-Feldman and subjects the complaint to dismissal. These were all filed 8 to 9 months ago. The court, Federal District Court, Middle District of Nashville, Tennessee, has not issued a single schedule order. The court has not set a trial date. The court hasn't scheduled any of the motions to dismiss for hearing, whether it's because that court has a bit of a backlog of other federal cases pending that's trying to get to, or because so much has happened in this matter that the court just simply doesn't know where to begin. Nothing's happened in this case, and it's been 11 months. I've never seen a matter sit in federal court for 11 months and not even have so much as a scheduling order setting a case for a trial, whether it's 1, 2, 3 years away, take place. In my view, the case is at an early stage, and I understand that it's large and perhaps perplexing why it's so large, but in my view, the case is in a current early stage. It's not worth this board's time to discuss in great detail. The motions to dismiss that are pending may have the effect of substantially reducing or perhaps eliminating the claimed entitlements to relief. And I feel it's better to allow the court to rule on one or more of the motions and then assess the true size of the claim, perhaps at the next legal review. Keeping all this in mind, just to explain to the board what's in the complaints, claims for damages, according to the complaint, total $80 million. These can be broken down as follows. For all the rent that was paid by the plaintiff and income that he lost, yes, as a result of living at Robin Lofts, $350,000. The lost ability of the plaintiff to earn income, interfering with business opportunities, $5 million. Humiliation, pain, and suffering, $15 million. punitive damages exceeding $60 million. That's the complaint in a nutshell, Knapp versus metropolitan governments. I am personally anxious to see what, if anything, the court finally does with this matter. But as I said, it has been pending in federal court with no action on either the plaintiff's complaint or any of the defendant's motions to dismiss. Final matter, Tia in Fitzpatrick Young versus MDHA. It's number 19C 1876, filed in Davidson County Circuit Court, August of 2009. Plaintiff here is the estate, Lynn Young, shot and died August of 2018. It's alleged in the complaint while standing in the doorway of the rear entrance of a relative's apartment in Edge Hill Homes. It's alleged in the complaint, MDHA failed to provide reasonable safety to the guest of a tenant. MDHA had knowledge of the criminal activity present in the area and failed to take reasonable action to stop the activity. The complaint also alleges the shooter was a resident of MDHA and that MDHA failed to vet the shooter for criminal propensity. There's no further information in the complaint about the shooter, who the shooter is, and why it's alleged the shooter may have been a resident of MDHA, nor is there any indication anywhere else of that fact either. As I'll explain in a minute, there's a reason, I believe, why that assertion that the shooter was an MDHA resident was specifically included in the complaint. At the time, Eye in the Sky, who manages, Eye in the Sky, it's a company, managed the camera system and provide related security services. They were named as a defendant. I believe they had a camera and it was, or they had several cameras at Edge Hill Homes, and it was alleged that none of the cameras that up captured the shooting. And so they were named as a defendant for not putting a camera at that location. Eye in the Sky has since been dismissed from the lawsuit. So right now it's just MDHA as the defendant. Now I mentioned earlier this allegation about the residents being thought to be a tenant at MDHA. The plaintiffs are likely posturing their case for relief under a Supreme Court of Tennessee case, Giggers versus Memphis Housing Authority. Supreme Court case recognizing a special relationship existing between a housing authority and a tenant, placing an obligation on the housing authority as landlord to use reasonable care to protect tenants against unreasonable risks of harm. In Giggers, a tenant with a known criminal background fired a bullet that killed the tenants. That was a fact in the case that was established. The court recognized in Giggers that the housing authority's failure to evict that tenant previously could potentially be relevant in determining whether the housing authority breached a duty of care to the tenants. That's the Giggers case. Distinguishing fact here, of course, there's no information on the shooter as far as where the shooter lives or anything about the shooter. But that's why they put that in the complaint, that the shooter was probably, or at least allegedly, a resident of MDHA housing. They're trying to posture their relief under Giggers versus Memphis Housing Authority. Our legal counsel is David Brogdon, who's representing MDHA in most of the other personal injury matters. His law firm is out of Dixon, Tennessee. The opposing counsel, you may have seen his advertisements on TV, a gentleman named Rocky McElhaney, who practices personal injury and other related litigation here in Nashville. The damages claimed in this one are $300,000 for wrongful death. That is the statutory cap set forth under the Government Tort Liability Act, which would apply to MDHA as a governmental entity and cap the available damages should there be liability imposed on MDHA. This case also is in the discovery stage. One of the senior property managers and I are working with the attorney in this matter on some of the interrogatories and requests for documents that have been received. The attorney advises that the damages are fully covered under insurance, and that insurance company Housing Authority Risk Management Trust has not issued a reservation of rights letter. Accordingly, it's expected, per the attorney, that the defense costs and any settlements or adverse judgment amounts would also be fully covered by these funds. That is the presentation of the pending cases to this board, and subject to any questions or concerns, I yield to the vice chair.
Thank you, Will. So would you mind putting us back into our Brady Bunch squares, and then we can have folks ask questions.
Okay, so I have stopped sharing.
There we go. That's great. Okay, questions for Will?
Hey, Will, Aola, good morning.
Hi.
Hey, on the last case you just presented, the Fitzpatrick Young case, has the actual shooter been found, arrested?
Not to my knowledge. So it's under investigation by Metro Nashville Police, and I don't. No.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, this is Mr. Copeland. The shooter, was he on the lease of housing?
So the question was the shooter on the lease, Hill? Commissioner Batts? So, if I understood the question correctly, we don't have any information on the shooter. So we don't know if the shooter was on a lease at any MDHA property or any property. The shooter is unknown.
Okay, I have another question about the cameras. So do MDHA still, are they still with the company with the cameras? I mean,
Eye in the Sky is still providing the camera services to MDHA as far as I know. Bowers, Commissioner Bowers.
Okay, you were unmuted. There we go.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Because there's a line through my microphone. So what does that mean? Anyway, so the identity of the shooter is unknown. Is that correct?
The identity of the shooter is unknown.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, with that, if there's no other questions, thank you, Will, for your presentation. And I'd like to move us on to the interest rate modification for 10th and Jefferson.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good.
We can, Jim. Good morning.
Good morning. The interest rate reduction program is a HUD program in their mortgage insurance program, in which, without renegotiating or redoing your loan, an entity that is already in the mortgage insurance program of HUD may reduce their interest rate as interest rates drop. It's a good program. Interest rates have dropped in this case for this loan sufficient to make it financially wise for us to take advantage of the program. There's a couple of wrinkles. The first is you can only do the interest rate reduction with the lender that you did the loan with and that has the mortgage insurance from HUD. So in this case, Walker and Dunlap, who negotiated this loan for us, is the people we're working with to achieve the interest rate reduction. But the short of it is we will achieve a rate reduction, not pay as much interest, and receive the benefit of this federal program that's been in place since about 2005. And Jim Thilgen, if you're on, could you go through the details of the numbers, please? I know you're up in your office, Jim. Are you on? Is he on? There he is.
Jim, it looks like you're muted right now. And now it looks like you're unmuted, but I don't know if we can hear you. Jim, can you speak? No, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay, well then I'll hit the highlights as provided in the board packet, and we will be coming to the board for a vote on this next month. Our principal balance is now just 7.7 million roughly. We'll be able to reduce any prepayment penalties should we pay it off earlier to 7%. We'll reduce the interest rate from 4.25% to I got to find the number. It's a 0.65% reduction to 3.7, and we'll save a penalty prepayment of about $500,000. And over the life of the loan, we'll save about $31,000 a year for a total of $1.1 million. And since we'll be voting on this next month, I would invite the board, since we have a little technical difficulties with our Chief Finance Officer, that if you have detailed questions, you can forward them to us by email, and be happy to answer anything on the numbers, or I'll answer it for you now as best I can. Jim works those details. They're provided in your write-up. The program I'm very familiar with. I was the signature authority for this program for about 4 years when I was at HUD. It's a great program. It's a good way to reduce our rates at really no cost to us, and we should take advantage of it. Subject to question, that's our presentation.
Hey, Jim. Good morning. Real quick, I worked back through the numbers, and they all look good, and I think this is a great outcome. Can you, in the future, when we're doing either refinancing transactions or we're doing kind of sort of before and afters, could you put together just a very simple table that's kind of sort of says original principal, new principal, right side by side, old interest rate, new interest rate, just side by side, and then it'd been clear. That way, it's just very easy for people to grasp that we're going from one position to another position. This is the net change in us over whatever period amount of time. It'll just make it easier, I think, for people just to comprehend it at a quick glance.
Will do. Good plan. Thanks. We'll do it.
And one more question, Jim. And so the $533,000 prepayment penalty, did we refinance that into the balance of the loan?
So I'm going to take that for the record and ask Jim. I believe so. And we've asked to waive the prepayment penalty. So it not yet occurred. There's some other wrinkles of the program that we're working on that we may not pan out. One example would be the placement fees in the secondary market. Those get placed in the secondary market. We're working with Walker and Dunlap to have those fees not accrued to us, because the intent of the program is to take full advantage of the interest rate reduction. But the way and we're in detailed negotiation, but the way the original loan was written, they control the secondary market placement, and those fees do accrue to us. We're asking for them to give us some forgiveness. But Jim Thilgen, can you come on and answer that one?
Okay, I've got my audio working. What was the question again? We were in the process of getting that set up.
Jim, we're getting a lot of feedback. Oh, I think it went away now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We can hear you.
Sure. Okay, what was the question again? We were trying to set up the audio over here when the question was coming out.
Oh, it was just a pretty straightforward question. I was just asking, was the 533,000 the prepayment penalty? Was that rolled over into the remaining into the new loan?
Okay, the principal amount of the loan stays the same. The effect of the prepayment penalty basically factors into the interest rate, where the interest rate probably would have been lower given the market conditions now if it wasn't that the prepayment penalty was factored into it. But the loan balance stays the same as it is now. It just we have less of a reduction in the interest rate.
Got it. So the principal of 7.6 million remains the 7.65 million rounded up remains the same. We've essentially financed the $530,000 of prepayment penalty in the form of an interest rate increase relative to how low it could have been otherwise. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need, is this just informational or do you want a vote from the committee?
We would ask the committee to vote on this so we can present it at the next board meeting as part of your presentation to the board, that the committee approve this for moving the board for approval.
Okay, great.
So these votes, as we know, are not required by the bylaws, but we have a tradition of doing that. So we should go ahead and continue that if that's fine.
Okay, so is there?
I think we anticipate that there will be a formal resolution that the lender will ask for at the June meeting to authorize the rate reduction.
Okay, so is there a motion to move forward with the interest rate reduction on 10th and Jefferson?
So moved.
Okay, Aioli, and then Kay, can you unmute and share your second?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor, please unmute and say aye.
Aye.
Hands are helpful as well.
Madam Chair, this is Bill Purcell, and I just wanted to be clear. We have apparently voted, but the resolution and the final consideration by the board will obviously have to have the many questions that were asked and issues of waivers raised and formally addressed. And so, as I understand it, we are approving the process that has been utilized to this point and advancing this to the full board, but there are a number of other issues that will be resolved and be a part of our deliberations at that time.
Yes, all right, thank you. All right, and so with that, I think we're ready to move on to the presentation of the Red Oaks Townhomes.
Thank you. And Brad, can you tee up the slides on the screen from where you are?
Yes, sir, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, while you do that, just as background, this is our next phase of Envision Casey, phase 7. This site is at the top of the hill, nearly immediately adjacent to the Explore School. This is something unique in the housing professional world in that we are taking advantage of a thing called the Fair Cloth Amendment, where Nashville has unused public housing subsidy that has been on the books for quite some time. We're bringing that public housing into the inventory as new public housing. And then immediately upon occupation, we are simultaneously processing rental assistance demonstration application to move it into project-based rental assistance and accrue all the advantages of the project-based rental assistance contracts and fee simple ownership of the property, as opposed to the public housing form of subsidy in which the federal government maintains a declaration of trust on the title. It's pretty sophisticated in that work with HUD. We're the only ones in the country doing it, and they've started a new office in HUD to handle it in the RAD conversion office, the recapitalization office, to do that. So at my level, this is one that has interest from the secretary in that it is a unique approach. We're doing the same thing at Randy Rogers. And both of these, I want to thank this administration for our metropolitan government, as well as their predecessors, because the source of equity here that enables this is capital spending plan funds from previous year allocations that were committed and that were followed through by this administration. It is a great project of townhomes. We will be coming for decisions in June or possibly later for the financing and guarantee maximum price of the program. But we wanted to go through with you now an informational review of the project. And Buck Dellinger right now is at his master's program for his master's in construction management that he's in our tuition assistance program. So we're calling upon our project manager for the site, Brad Muckle, one of our great superstars, to cover this with the board. So Brad, if you want to go ahead with that intro, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Harvison. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Hope everybody is well this morning. So I'll be as brief as I can. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to jump in and don't be shy. So this is the Red Oak Townhomes project. Using the Envision KC master plan build out. The purpose of the presentation, as Mr. Harvison mentioned, is just to inform the development committee of a pending decision next month at your board meeting. The decision today sought to grant the executive director the authority to negotiate and agree to loan terms for the implementation of this 7th phase of the KC master plan build out. This is known as Red Oak Townhomes. It consists of 44 new units, 25 of which will be low-income subsidized units. These 25 units are additive to MDHA's inventory portfolio, increasing the number of rent subsidized units managed by MDHA. The primary source of funds for this project are funds provided by Mayor Brierly's 2019 capital spending plan. This is just a overall site plan of the KC development. You can see here in the lower right-hand quadrant, Red Oak Townhomes project is circled in red. It is conjoined with the Red Oak Flats project, which is currently roughly 30% constructed along Lenore Street at the intersection of Lenore and South 7th. And it is directly across the street from the Explore Community School, which was recently finished construction. This aerial photograph actually does a very effective job in illustrating those 7 projects in our portfolio. You see that every tag in blue is one of our Envision KC projects. At Kirkpatrick Park Apartments, which is really townhomes and flats over flats, which is just off to the right-hand side of the screen here. Then Explore School is next door to Kirkpatrick Park Apartments. And the subject project here, Red Oak Townhomes, is directly across from the new Deuce Street extension that we just finished construction on. So the residents of Red Oak Townhomes will be able to walk their children directly across the street to the Explore Community School. And as you can see here, it is conjoined with Red Oak Flats, which I mentioned earlier. You can see MDHA headquarters there in the background, and Titan Stadium there and further background, and then way in the back, the downtown cityscape. And you have Barrett Manor, which was project number 1 in the KC redevelopment plan, Mosley and Manning, as you go around sort of counterclockwise around this area. This street down here is Lenore Street. Red Oak Townhomes will have a street that we're constructing, which will bifurcate the project, which will go from Deuce Street down the hill to Lenore. I'll show you that site plan here in a minute, just to give you some sense of orientation within the site. So that is the lay of the land, so to speak. So if there are no questions on that, I'll move on. These are 2 of the best renderings that we have from our architectural team. You can see that the top building here is internal to the Red Oak Townhomes community, and it is 2-story and 3-story town units. At the bottom of your screen here, you see one of the buildings, actually the 2 buildings along Lenore Street. And given the terrain of the site, we were able to build 4-story units down here along Lenore. The site actually drops considerably from the north to south in elevation. So we will have 4-story units along Lenore Street, 3-story and 2-story units throughout the rest of the community. So the numbers for the project, in a nutshell, the site is approximately 1.7 acres in size, 44 townhomes in all, as I mentioned earlier. 25 low-income subsidized, 7 workforce, and 12 market rate. The bedroom breakdown is as follows. We have 4 one-bedroom units, 13 two-bedroom units, 19, the lion's share, are 3-bedroom units, 7 4-bedroom units, and 1 5-bedroom unit in the project. Estimated total costs are $16.5 million, with $12.8 million going to construction and $3.6 going towards soft costs, architectural fees, impact fees, all sorts of permitting fees, and so on and so forth. Those numbers include a 7.6% contingency. This is the estimated permanent sources. We have a CITC loan of $6 million, Metro financing of $10.5 million, which you mentioned earlier. So, Mr. Harbison, did you want Curtis to go into any level of detail on that, or you just want me to move on? Or
we'll pause because in case there are questions, but I think if everyone's familiar with it, CITC stands for Community Investment Tax Credit. It's a program here uniquely the state of Tennessee. Other states have it, but not every state has it. It allows a bank to receive Community Reinvestment Act credits with the Federal Reserve in exchange for providing loans at 4 full percentage points below prime. So we anticipate as we close this, it will be close to or be a 0% loan. Pinnacle has been very generous with us on these loans in that they are typically for construction, but they can be extended throughout the life of the project. And thus far, our Pinnacle loans, and Jim may need to clean me up on this, but many of those, they have extended the benefit of the very low interest rates to the project for extended periods of time to include the length of the project. We don't have that quite put together, but when we close, that option is in the lending agreements. So very generous terms. Most of this is cash out of the capital spending plan from the city. The other of it will be financed at 0%. A couple of comments. If you run some numbers, you'll see that on a unit basis, our costs look a little high. They're in the $350,000 a unit range. This is intentionally sized to a large number of bedrooms, because that is our most difficult property to type of property to replace on site. The majority are 3s, 4s, and 5s, which have high square foot areas. So our cost per square foot area is on par with the rest of the community. After you have there's some pretty substantial infrastructure costs here that will be funded as well. So that'd be my comments. Curtis or Jim Thilligan, if you'd like to add to the financing profile or any discussion of CITC, please feel free, and then we'll pause here and see if the board has questions.
Okay, on the CITC loan, this one actually is going to be from what had been Franklin Synergy Bank, which apparently just merged just recently with First Bank. So they will be providing the loan. We expect to get the commitment letter almost any day now. It went through the Franklin Synergy Board 2 weeks ago, went through First Bank last week, and we understand that there was a second loan that went through for another developer for a CITC loan with First Bank. It did not get approved, but ours did. So we anticipate moving pretty quickly. The attorney that we work with for First Bank will be the same attorney that we worked with a couple of years ago on the Harper Cove financing. So we think that's going to go real quickly. But looks like everything's in place, and we expect to bring this to the board for the approval of the loan during June.
So just for curiosity's sake, when we run our pro forma on this, what kind of debt service coverage ratio? I'm assuming we're paying it. What's the term of this loan? I guess the first question is, what's the term of the loan?
Typically, the loan itself is a 15-year loan, but the amortization schedule is either 25 or 30 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what kind of free cash flow do we expect this project to generate for us? That means we should be paying nothing on this.
Okay. Brad, do you have Curtis there? I think he's run the numbers on this.
Curtis has got this. If we don't have it right here, we can get it back to you on the record. We definitely run it. It's a good cash flow.
Yes, I don't have the pro forma in front of me, but I'll get that to be sent out for you.
We're going to cash flow well here.
I mean, that's right. You should never want to pay this loan back.
So, Jim, can you explain, just to make sure everyone's up to speed, what you were talking about with this being a Faircloth Amendment project? And also, why are we pulling down more units under Faircloth right now for this project? How does that feed into our larger strategy?
Okay, if you recall the retreat, I covered this, and in each of your in briefs, I covered this. The Davidson County has authorized a total of 6,500 public housing units. At the time of our conversion for the existing number of units in the inventory of public housing, and we converted to RAD, we had 5,469 units, which left a balance of just over 1,000 public housing units that were available, and if they were built, would be eligible for indefinite full federal subsidy forever. I won't get into the reasons that gap exists. They exist in many communities in America. I just can't answer that. It was before my watch, but it is a large opportunity. And then if you build it, the federal subsidy allows you to have new, fully funded affordable housing for people of low income, where they pay no more by federal law than 30% of their earned income. And if they're basically the poverty line, 18,000 or below roughly, they pay $25 a month. The feds pay the rest of the subsidy. So our strategy, at least since I've gotten here, is to take advantage of that opportunity and bring in new inventory to our community where possible under public housing and create new public housing. We did that at Barrett Manor. Barrett Manor was the first, and it was new construction, new public housing inventory. It came into the inventory before we converted to RAD, so it went in with a large RAD conversion. We then explored with HUD, which no one else had done, that if we bring in inventory into public housing, may we, since we're no longer to have public housing as our subsidy model on the advice of HUD and at their request, we don't have it anymore. Can we immediately move it over to the project-based rental assistance, thereby gaining the value of owning it, not owning it with the federal government really owning it, and gaining the advantage of the project-based rental assistance contract, which allows us to increase those contracts for inflation every year. They said, okay, it's interesting. We explored it with them, and we created this model where, simultaneous with all the work that goes into creating new public housing, which is quite a bureaucratic road, that's in one section of HUD, we simultaneously process the paperwork with another section of HUD as if the public housing already existed to convert it, so that while we're building it and financing it, and when it's complete and on cert aqua, the tenant moved in, it becomes public housing for one day, and then the next day converts to RAD. So the basic strategic rationale for the board is this is the only method that any of us can find at the professional side of affordable housing to increase the subsidized, fully affordable inventory in Nashville. We're taking down public housing and then moving it into the more attractive and generous, if you will, and usable subsidy called project-based rental assistance. HUD likes it. It's somewhat of an innovation to them. We're basically putting together several programs simultaneously to create new affordable housing, introducing our model as new inventory with new construction in a mixed income way. And that's sort of the background. We started with George Barrett Manor. We started that construction in roughly 2014. We finished and got it in 2016 and then converted to RAD. Randy Rogers is a similar model. All the low-income units there, the ones that are subsidized, federally subsidized units, they're all new to Nashville. They didn't exist before the program. And we will continue to add to the inventory in a mixed income way without creating new concentrations of poverty, and create more opportunities for people of low income in Nashville. Just look at our waiting list, and it's pretty obvious it's a need. I hope that answered your question, Commissioner.
Thank you, Jim. There's nothing simple about what we're doing, but it's incredibly innovative. And I just want to keep making sure that we're keeping all of our board and any potential audience members with us. My next question for you, and then Kay, I realize you have questions, so I'll turn the floor over after this. Can you help me understand why are we electing to put so much equity into this project? Is it that we can't carry more debt for the numbers to work? Or is there something related to us needing the Metro, the capital for Metro quickly?
Excellent question. There's really three rationales to it. I'll start with the one that's really the most important in terms of execution. Please remember that this program that we are pioneering, it has no predecessor. So HUD's public housing model in building new public housing is near purely predicated on cash from the capital federal program. So the more cash you have in, the easier it is to get it to the wickets and have them understand it. This is classified, I know this is going to be housing geek stuff to many people. This is classified as a mixed finance development public housing program in one of the lanes we're tracking. And the more cash you have in it, the less risk the public housing system of approval faces for approving this to be brought into the public housing inventory. So the more cash you have, the lower risk to the public housing model. The people that run the public housing model do not participate in their experience with debt or with project-based rental assistance or the multifamily world. Another section of HUD does, and they're very comfortable with it. But in order to get it through the public housing steps, which is the first gauntlet, if you will, the first process, the heavier you are in cash, the easier it is for approval. So that was one rationale. The second is these were funds originally allocated under a construct that is no longer there locally, called Under One Roof, which you may remember. And we were asked to quickly demonstrate the profitable use of Metro funds by a previous administration, and no aspersions on anybody, but we were asked, and at the time we constructed the program and were obligating those funds with Metro, the request was get the funds so we can demonstrate success in the program as quickly as possible. And this was a good way to do it. And then the third was to what Aoli said. At the time we were doing this, remember Kirkpatrick, when we were starting the planning and the things that are now coming to fruition, Kirkpatrick Park was not leased up. And so we already knew we were taking debt in other parts of the portfolio based on a mixed income model of multifamily property management that frankly, you heard the purpose-built presentation. The purpose-built complete is 687 units. We're going to exceed that by the time we finish this one. So, and I'm not saying anything, I'm not dancing the end zone or beating my chest, but we were mitigating the risk, to Haley's point, of having a really rock solid project that would cash flow and contribute to any shortcomings that might be in our other debt management across the portfolio. We're not worried about any of them. They all cash flow. They're all at one. They all meet the minimum debt service coverage ratios for Haley's questions. 1.2, I think is what we all are at. Most of them exceeded, but this was a low risk project. It met the needs of the administration at the time. It assisted us in having the conversation with the public housing lane, Section 9 lane, PIH, and to get their initial approvals and their support. And so that led to a heavy contribution of cash from the capital spending plan inventory.
Thank you, Jim, for that. I frankly feel a little bit frustrated with HUD in this matter because, you would hope at this point, since we are doing RAD conversion, that we could get them more comfortable with carrying the project through all the way and not having to have, it fit under the model with no risk and their ownership, but making it possible, no RAD is coming, that they would allow the projects to look a little different. And so I just hope that in all of your great work with them, you advocate and continue to try to push for that in your conversations as much as possible. With that, Kay, let me turn it over to you. Kay?
Yep. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I want to go to the bedroom breakdowns of the subsidized units. My sense is that the larger or the higher number of bedrooms are probably in those units, but I'd like confirmation of that. And then the breakdown of bedrooms for workforce and market rate. That's question one into three pieces. Next question, Brad or Curtis, what process was used to decide how many bedrooms each subgroup would have? What was your decision-making process for that? And then last question, just in terms of square footage, could you just give an approximate square footage for 1 bedroom, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom? Thank you.
So I'll jump in on the rationale. The rationale simply goes to our commitment not to take tenants off property and looking at the inventory that exists on the property and sequencing in as we develop what's possible to get to the large bedrooms. So, and Curtis, I think you've got the breakdown, Brad doesn't, but the 3, 4s, and 5s are heavy subsidy because there's nobody else that does 5-bedroom subsidized apartments. You can't get a voucher for them. Nobody rents them up in the voucher world. So we were focused on replacing those because of their difficulty in replication. So those were the basics. Are we have a lot of those we have to replace. We need to get moving on it now that we've shown at Mosley and at Kirkpatrick that things will lease up in the mixed income environment. We're moving forward and working to get as many high bedroom units done as possible. And Brad or Curtis, could you address the bedroom mix for workforce, market, and low income? And I don't know if we got the square. We may have to take the square foot area question for the record and get back to you, Ken. I don't know if we got that one at hand.
I've got the bedroom mix in front of me. For the subsidized units, there's 1 2-bedroom, 16 3-bedrooms, 7 4-bedrooms, and 1 5-bedroom. For workforce, there are 5 2-bedrooms, 2 3-bedrooms, and for market rate, there are 4 1-bedrooms, 7 2-bedrooms, and 1 3-bedroom.
Thanks, Curtis.
For the workforce, there's also 2 1-bedrooms.
2 1-bedrooms on the workforce.
That's correct.
Okay.
Brad or maybe Michael, do you have the square foot area takeoffs on these? We didn't put it in the, I know we have them. I don't know if we got them at hand. We can provide those at a later. We can send them by email, okay, if we don't have them right here. I'm not sure we've got those. They're in the architectural drawings for sure.
I don't have them readily available. I'd have to pull them up on my laptop. It would take a minute.
We'll take that for
You
record.
guys-
Get an answer back to you today.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Yes, Bill Purcell, just a quick clarification. Brad, in your discussion of soft costs, you mentioned in addition to architects' fees and permitting fees, impact fees. Impact fees have been a matter of some discussion, and I would like you just to clarify at this time, both state law and local law do not provide for what are traditionally known as impact fees. Could you just clarify what you meant by that?
Impact fees, no. The traditional impact fees based on water and sewer usage, that's not what I was referring to. Impact fees, just the permitting fees going to the municipality, stormwater, plan review, those sorts of fees. So
understood. Thanks.
So Brad, now we derailed you. You want to go on and continue with the presentation?
that's great. Okay. So the final slide, I believe, is just the site plan here. This lays out the 7 buildings in the project. You can see that the top of your screen on the north side is Dew Street. Just across the street from Dew is the Explore Community School that I spoke about earlier. Just off the west side of the page here is the Boscobel Flats project. And on the south end is Lenore Street. So the elevation change that I spoke about earlier was Dew Street is sort of the high point or the ridge line in KC, if you will. So the site falls considerably from Dew Street down Red Oak Hill Lane to a much lower elevation at Lenore. So these two buildings here along Lenore are 4-story buildings. So we took advantage of the drop in terrain there to put an extra story on these units. You can see the parking layout here, a tandem dumpster enclosure central to the development. We also have a pavilion with a mailbox kiosk here at the main entrance and a playground, which is framed by 2 large existing trees. The playground will actually be constructed as part of the Boscobel 3 Flats project off to the west. So playground will be there once the Red Oak Town units. Again, just 25 additional low-income subsidized units, 7 additional workforce units, and in the lower right-hand corner is just a project team. EOA Architects from here in Nashville. The construction management firm is RG Anderson, also here in Nashville. I will be project manager. The owner's representative.
Brad, could you go back to the picture slide that had the overhead visual? Just go back about 3 hours. This is on the next presentation, actually. I want that one's great. So if you look at this picture and you look at where Martha O'Brien sits, and right below it, you see the green area, that's going to be a central park. I think everybody's seen the master plan. But essentially the property that is the high ground that leads from Martha O'Brien down the hill towards Barrett Manor. And the water on the left-hand side of your picture from that Martha O'Brien to Barrett line goes into one pipe of storm and now concurrently sewer. On the other side, it goes into another. And that's going to be our next topic. This visual gives you a good sense of the property and that the natural waterfall on the left-hand side goes to one pipe to the river and the right-hand side goes to another pipe to the river. And that's what we're going to discuss next. So I just want that visual helps me kind of get in my mind what we're going to talk about next. It really doesn't relate to Red Oak Townhomes, but it's a good visual. And I would ask Brad I'm going to embarrass him. Can you just give us your credentials as a project manager, just an example of our skill of our team? I know you didn't bring your resume, but you've done some great work for us with Red Oak and Kirkpatrick and Explorer and many others. So just give background a little bit for you.
Sure. Well, let's see. I've been with MDHA going on 3 years now. Prior to that, I was an executive director for community redevelopment for Collier County, Florida, which is Naples, Florida, is the county seat in Southwest Florida, for 8 years. Prior to that, I was a land development project manager for Pulte Homes. And prior to that, way back when, in a former life, I was a construction development program management consultant for URS out of Washington, D.C., which is now AECOM, based out of California now. So since coming to MDHA, let's see, I have degrees in architecture, construction management, and an MBA. Since coming to MDHA, as Mr. Harbison mentioned, I started with Kirkpatrick Park Apartment. That was my sort of the seed project for me. Then Explore School, and now Red Oak Flats and Red Oak Townhomes. So I am the PM handling everything east of South 7th Street. That seems to be the dividing line of my responsibility geographically. So that's me in a nutshell. But PMP certified. Just enjoy being with MDHA and involved in vertical and horizontal and planning, and it's the whole totality of what we do here is brings all of my experience to a head. So it's a great mixed bag.
Thank you. I just wanted the board to be, we've got some great staff, and I appreciate, I know it's a little embarrassing sometimes, so I appreciate doing that. You can go on to the end of the presentation. So unless there's any other questions, we can go on to the next presentation for the vice chair.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Hearing none, I think that we can move on to the next presentation. And just to recap, I think it would be very helpful before we have to vote on that to see the pro forma and know a bit more about the cash flow, and then follow up with Kay about square footage.
Got it.
This is Mike Wegerson. Are we ready to move to the outfall? KC utility phase 1?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't come off mute. Well, good. Why can't I come off mute? Hey, Robbie, I can't come off mute.
We can hear you, Jim.
You can.
Oh, okay. Sorry. The interesting red button. So the Mike's going to cover this again. Buck is working on his master's in construction management, Auburn class today under our tuition assistance program. Mike heads up the recapitalization section of the development team. We here at Casey are paying for, here at MDHA, paying for a sewer pipe to cover that left-hand side water, stormwater, and sanitary. This has been something that's been a requirement since the start, and we'll be paying for that pipe. Mike will go through the detail. But essentially, this is a requirement for Metro Water. And when we first did the master planning, there was a conscious decision made by Metro Water planners not to place detention facilities, temporary holding ponds, on the Envision Casey development. Their plan was to get the water from the new development, which creates impervious to water. In other words, not soil. Water doesn't go in the soil anymore. It goes onto pavement and others or roofs, to get that water to the river quickly while the other detention facilities in the watershed fill up, and they would then follow. So that was their direction to us. That was their plan. We're executing it. But just as, you know, as just a point, we are paying for all the infrastructure to run this pipe to the river. And with Mike, if you'll go ahead with covering this plan, this will be an informational presentation.
Yeah. So again, Mike Wegerson, Director of Recap. So the KC utility phase 1 is what I'll be going over today. Everybody can see my PowerPoint on the screen. Is that correct?
Yes, Mike.
Good. There we go. All right. I'll read through this real quick. So the purpose of this presentation is to inform the Development Committee of a pending decision at the July 14th, 2020 board meeting. So we're about 2 months out on this. But we felt like this is the appropriate time to let you know that it's coming. The decision sought is to grant the executive director the authority to negotiate and agree to construction terms for the implementation of the next phase of the stormwater outflow, the sewer separation, and the sidewalk utility plan for the KC master plan. This utility work is being required of us by Metro Water Services before we can actually move on with other future phases. I'll explain that in a minute. And contemplated by the master plan and the specific plan, SP, to allow for the density, the additional density that we're adding here at KC at KC Bosco Heights. The source funds for this project will be MDHA unrestricted reserves. So this map here is showing the way rainwater flows off the land. So the KC Bosco Heights neighborhood is everything that's in the solid red and orange combined. And then the additional hashing contemplates the full Benedict Crutcher Basin. Name predates anything that I'm aware of. That's just what we're calling it. So all of this is the Benedict Crutcher watershed, which then flows into the Cumberland River. So to give some references, and I'm hoping my handy dandy pen here works. Where I just put that red dot, that's the Nicely building. and you have Boscobel 1, Boscobel 2, and Boscobel 3 over there for some additional references. So in the dividing line here between the orange and the red is the crest in the property that Mr. Harbison mentioned in the photo previously. So north of the crest, so the red solid shaded area flows to the north, and then subsequently, so everything's kind of flowing northwest. So top left in the dark shaded red, or solid shaded red. So that's flowing toward 5th Street is really the collector, and that will be the pipe that flows out in what we'll call phase 2. So I won't be discussing that today. I'm just giving you some reference. Everything in orange flows more directly to the south or to the southwest. And it's headed toward the 6th Street collector and will flow out through 6th Street to the river. So this is kind of similar, just kind of overlaying what we just showed you on the rainflow map, overlaying that on our phasing map, our KC Boscobel Heights phasing map. So again, you see Boscobel 1 or mostly on 6th, Manning Place, or Boscobel 2, and the Red Oak Flats, also known as Boscobel 3. So these projects have already gone and replaced some of the piping in 6th Street between Dew and Lenore, and then also in 7th Street between Dew and Lenore, as well as working for all the infrastructure in Dew Street. And some of the infrastructure in Lenore. So, the additional infrastructure that still needs to be done for Lenore will be picked up in the Lenore Gardens project. So you can still see that there's a little bit of work here for the Boscobel 4 will pick up in 6th Street. And there's some additional work that the library project will be picking up separately. And Red Oak Towns is going to be picking up some of the infrastructure in this section of Lenore Street. But our project, the KC Phase 1 utility, is what happens downstream from all of that work. So I don't know if I can change the pen color here. So hopefully this changes. No, that didn't do it for me. All right, well, moving along to here, you can actually see then where the how the downstream works. So what I was showing in red before is right through all of this section. This is what in red, what I'm denoting in red is what we've done on previous projects. But to get to the river now, as Mr. Harbison mentioned, that's the ultimate goal. Is Metro Water doesn't want us to retain. They want us to get all this rainwater out to the river as quickly as we can. There's strategy involved there. Since we're so close to the river, it makes sense to get our rainwater collection to the river and downstream as quickly as we can, so that way other properties that take longer for that rainwater to flow to the river, it doesn't get all bottled up and create a flooding situation. So there's tactics involved with how we reduce the risk of flooding. So that means that we need to change a few things about the downstream. So I'm going to skip to the scope here real quick. We're replacing sanitary sewers, storm sewers, the water lines, and the asphalt and sidewalks and curb and gutter that go along with that. And we're doing all of this with the intent of this completes what we need for Envision KC, the SP, the master plan for Boscobel Heights. So there shouldn't be a need to redo this work in the future. And Metro Water has actually been very adamant that we make sure that we do that. Certainly we have been as well. And Kimley Horn's been doing a great job of making sure that we collect all the information that we need. So this is a one-time thing. We don't have, when we redevelop Lenore Gardens, we're not tearing this all back up and replacing it again.
Excuse me. Let me interrupt real quick. So Jim, you said that you'd be bringing this to the next board meeting for approval. At the time we get to the approval, will we move from an estimated budget to a budget that's been bid out? Will we expect to see that at the next meeting, or?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And the next meeting, as I stated before, this will come to the July board meeting, not June.
Got it. Sorry about that. I missed it. I thought I heard June. Okay.
I just noticed in my packet that there's a difference in the estimated cost.
Yes, so we just received and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We just received an updated estimate from the engineer last night. So I've updated to reflect that. We're hoping that this is a conservative number and that when the bids come in, that it comes down. So that way we're meeting more closely to the original estimates, which are what are in your board packet. Probably also then is where you're getting the June 9th meeting is probably listed in your board packet. We won't be, we have numbers. So we're wrapping up design now. We're in the final stages of design and review with Metro Water and the other Metro departments. And so we'll be ready to bid that here shortly. And we might just be able to get the numbers in, but we're looking at this as a best value approach. So we'll include qualifications as well as a lump sum number to be provided in the request for qualifications and proposals.
So on the best value approach, are we sending to the market 100% complete design?
I believe so. If not, we're at least at 90 to 95%. I know the drawings that Kimley Horn is our engineer that they've been putting together are very strong. They've already been in review with the Metro departments, and so a lot of their comments are already being incorporated. So our hope is that we're wrapping up those drawings here in the next couple of weeks and then get this out on the street.
Got it. And so help me understand why we're going to a best value approach, given that there's really no design risk to the contractor bidding. They're simply, taking off and trying to secure trades. I typically see a best value approach when there's significant risk in the cost numbers based on the level of design that's there. Just trying to understand why we've chosen this approach.
I would angle that there are civil contractors that are better suited for this type of project. So it's a little bit of making sure that we're going to get the proper level of service for this project. This clearly is not our standard civil project that for one of our residential. This isn't just the small amount of sewers that are typically smaller size pipes. So we're wanting to make sure that we're getting contractors that are fully capable and responsible for this project.
So, the qualification aspect really gets to the difficulty of the project. And while this looks straightforward, these water pipes, some of them are 80, maybe older years of age. We're going through areas of town that have some sensitivities of working with the local population. All those are important to us. Obviously, the number will be critical as well, but we really want to make sure that we don't have to come back and have a position where there's something that wasn't done correctly. mainly because, you know, this side of the river, this is the last time we want to do it. We got to do another one on the other side of the river that we'll talk about a little bit. We're not anywhere close to even starting on, but we want to make sure we've got the right contractor, and the qualification best approach seemed to us to be the best way to do it. Straight numbers, you know, or you could hard bid the job, but you don't see what's inside the number always, and you don't, you may have a little bit more challenge to disqualify someone or to have someone selected on the most highly qualified, not just qualified. So that's been our approach from the start on this one, just because of the nature of the difficulty of this, and also meeting the conditions of Metro Water will certainly have on us to make sure this is done correctly.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Jim, in terms of the challenges in finding the right contractors with the right level of skill sets, knowledge, and experience to do the job, so that you have confidence that you mitigate your risk. So what's your process for doing that? Okay.
You're on mute.
Right there. I'm on mute.
Now we can hear you now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So request for qualifications, which we've been doing routinely at least for 6 years. We form a board of the best qualified within MDHA to review all the proposals. Proposals come in, we score them based on the qualification statement of the RFQ. Each one is scored independently by the members of the team. The team then ranks those collectively, and we bring in generally a top 2 or top 3 for individual interviews, in which we question them on their qualification and skills. We do a background check of all their credentials. So if they're licensed as a civil engineer, we'll call and make sure the license is current and complete. They're required to provide references, typically 5. We call and check with the references, and generally we go visit at least 1, if not 2 of the jobs that they've recently completed, and talk to the owner that they did the work for. Based on that, we bring them in for verbal interviews. We go through their schedule, their cost control measures, their qualifications, how they'll do with local populations. Often I'll sit in on those if I've got a concern, and I want to make sure that our questions include certain things. I'm a licensed electrical engineer, although not practicing. You heard Brad's credentials. Each of our project managers have equal credentials, either master's level degrees, architectural, civil engineering degrees, and extensive experience. Based on the responses verbally to the questions, the board will then vote again and rank them based on the scoring criteria in the RFQ. They'll then present that to me. I'll review it. I read all the proposals on each of these. I review the scoring criteria, and then I generally ask the president of the board. Before I see it, Buck reviews it as well. We then bring it to you. It goes to the development committee. We go through the scoring process. You see the summaries. We answer your questions. You make the final decision. It's a vetting process used. I've used it in the healthcare industry. I've used it in other industries. It has developed for us a good system thus far of qualified contractors and qualified architects. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. I understand your process, your general process that you normally use. This is just, this kind of infrastructure work is not your typical residential infrastructure work. It sounds like you have, I'm confident you have the process in place to make sure you have people with the experience that you have confidence in that can get the job done. Because it's expensive. Mistakes are expensive, as we all know, in this type of work.
So Jim or Mike, please help me understand, I know absolutely nothing about infrastructure projects of this size, but are the expectations being put on us in terms of, developing this whole stormwater system typical and commensurate from water for?
I referenced that to Scott Potter, Metro Water. I don't know. So we are just trying to get the job done. So we're in discussion on the other larger pipe that's more expensive. But how this compares to what other developers pay, I just don't know. I can research it if you want, but we need to.
Okay, well, I would say is that this is Stormwater has become a very hot topic in Nashville in utilities. For the most part, we have a combined sewer water system throughout the city, and pretty much any large project you're getting to today, the city is asking you to separate sewer and water, even if they make you put it back into a line somewhere off your property that ends up being combined just again. The project I was working on with Vanderbilt right at 21st, right at 21st and Broadway, the project is going to have to pull up all the sewer, run it all down 21st, turn it, put it down Broadway, to only go back around Lyle Avenue and stick it back into a pipe. So on large scale projects, my experience has been is that there's a very strong focus of extracting as much value out of the infrastructure work from the developer as possible.
This is Saul. Can you hear me?
We can.
I think, Executive Director Harbison is being a little bit modest, and I don't know if it's because he's been frustrated with this project or why, but he has spent a considerable amount of time working with water to do what, through political channels, through just talking to water, through working with the prior administrations, to try to defray some of the costs on MDHA, given what the mission is for this project, and has not really been successful. Doesn't mean he won't continue to try, but it's been a source of frustration, I think, for everybody working on this project at MDHA, that there can't be some relief placed on the demands in terms of who's going to source the capital for these projects. But I just want to make sure everybody understands that the effort has been really made to try to, and Aeoli is absolutely right about private developers and what the requirement is. But anyway, I just thought I would mention that.
So if I may, I'm going to go back to this map and really highlight the idea here that the sections of the outfall that we're working on, as it goes to the river, is the majority of the water that is flowing into that. Our engineer did calculations for this. We're somewhere around like 95% of the stormwater that flows into that pipe. So for this phase, this phase one, we've been. Let me back up just a second here. So we've been working with Metro Water for about 2 years, negotiating with them to figure out how we're going to share expenses. And that's gone back and forth a little bit. We postulated that they should be covering a higher amount, and they've postulated that we should be covering a higher amount. Our method was looking at it by area. Their method was looking at it by volume, and how much that changes the size of the pipe. And ultimately, where we were able to reside was looking at, in particular, phase two, a 50-50 cost sharing that we're working to finalize that MOU with Metro Water. I'll show you phase two at the end of this presentation. For this phase, because it is primarily MDHA's stormwater that's being collected, this is MDHA's expense. If that clarifies it, that's how it's been approached.
That's helpful. Thanks, Mike.
Come back to this slide. So just to put words to the yellow lines there. So the site is defined then as on South 6th Street, which is the long one. This here is 6th. I'm doing a terrible job of rating on the side, but that is 6th. From Lenore Street, which is here, down to the Cumberland River. So this is the Cumberland River there. We're working then to, this should really complete our downstream flow for 7. So right now, Red Oak Flats, Boscoville 3 is working on this section, and they'll be able to then continue that section down to where it collects in Crutcher. So just between Lenore, and Crutcher Street. Then for Crutcher, we're extending a little bit up this way. This is helping us collect water from Red Oak Townhomes and the library. So there's a pipe that extends up this way and picks up Red Oak Townhomes is here, and the library property up here. And I think it actually does collect just a little bit of Explore School, which sits there. So that this water is flowing downstream this way. So we needed to pick that up in a larger pipe. So all of this replacement is to provide larger capacity pipes. As a result of, as Mr. Harbison mentioned earlier, the additional imperviousness that we are implementing into our redevelopment. And again, that means surface parking and the actual building footprints themselves are larger than what we currently have at Casey. So that comes into Crutcher Street and picks it up from right about there to just a little bit past 6th. And then all of that flows down to the river along 6th. There's a reason I made this a different color down here. Basically just changing the scope of work slightly. That particular pipe is, it's a 54-inch pipe that is significantly deep in the ground, and it runs under the parking lot of another property owner. So we're very much not interested in having to dig up that property owner's parking lot. We were at one point looking at a boring solution. That's a significantly sized boring unit that we would have to bring out for that, and be working deep. It would be expensive. Thankfully, giving credit here to Kimley Horn, when they evaluated that 54-inch pipe, it's in good condition. It might need a few repairs or a new liner, but it's in good condition, and it's at a 5% slope, which, not to get too technical on this, basically just means that it can handle the larger pipes that are flowing into it that they're flowing at a much smaller slope, like a 1% or 0.5% slope. Because it has this 5% slope, that means it can actually handle more volume. So Kimley Horn did the analysis, realized that we don't actually need to replace that. And again, we're kind of going through negotiations with Metro Water right now as to whether it needs a new liner or if it just needs some minor repairs. That will have an effect on the final pricing.
Do you know what the age of that pipe is?
A lot of these, that particular section of the pipe might not be quite as old as 80 years. I do know the age of the majority of the pipes within Casey are in fact 80 years old.
And they're made out of what?
Some of these are concrete, at least concrete, if not RCP, which is reinforced concrete pipe. We have dug up old brick structures in the past. Now that's for sewer. For the water pipe, there's still going to be some ductile iron pipe that's in the ground. And I do believe we're replacing some of that based on the size with ductile iron pipe of a larger size, but also if there's opportunity to provide PVC or large scale PVC or the like, we will try to use those materials if permissible.
Thanks.
So the why here, as I've mentioned, the existing sewers and pipes are of insufficient size for the redevelopment of Casey. So we're going from, including the CWA residents, we're going from 968 units to 2,700 units, which is why I'm saying that there will be less perviousness or more imperviousness, if you want to look at it that way, meaning that building footprints in those parking lot sizes are going to take up more green space than we currently are using. As a result, that is why Metro Water, as well as the EPA, is requiring us to make sure that our pipes are of the proper capacity. And I mentioned that earlier. What they're looking at are the this gets a little technical, but the 10 and 100-year flood rates, flooding models, and so they look at both of those to determine what's the likelihood of these pipes actually flooding under those conditions.
Mike, that's good. Can we move on to slide of the subject? Unless there are questions, move on to slide 6. We're going to be pressed for time here in a moment. Unless there are questions on the slide from the committee.
So this is just projecting the schedule here. We're wrapping up the final design now. We'll get the bids out here soon, the RFP rather, and looking to select the contractor before for the committee to select a contractor to put in front of Mr. Harbison and the board in July. I'm kind of estimating a construction period here. This isn't my forte to project the time frame for construction on a utility project. That'll be part of the qualifications, and the best value approach is not only the cost, but also how quickly they'll be getting the project completed. Project team is Kimley Horn has been our engineer. They've really been our engineer all along, kind of in the background of the master planning. So it made the most sense to bring them along for this being a more complicated infrastructure project. The contractor, as I mentioned, will be selected in June, and I will be the PM on this project. And then the last slide here is very simplified, but this is 5th Street. Is the yellow line there. So in phase 2, which I mentioned earlier would be a cost sharing approach between us and Metro Water Services, this is going to be a very large pipe serving more than just the MDHA community here. And it will need to extend from Shelby all the way to the river. It's going to be a complicated design, but we really haven't started it yet. We're trying to line it up with the completion of CWA phase 1 and 2. And that also fits more in line with the plan that Metro Water Services is looking for. And we'll have more information on this as in the coming years. That's the end. That's the last slide.
Are there any questions from the committee?
So Jim, go ahead, Kay.
It says it's 108-inch line. What does that mean?
So each diameter, that's the width of the pipe itself, and that's an initial estimate based on Kimley Horn's watershed analysis. I think, as Mike said, we're just working with Metro Water on this, have been for several years, including back to the start of the master planning for Envision Case. If you look at the master plan book, it's in there that this is one of the challenges of developing the site. So, but 108 inches is the width across. Yeah, width of the pipe. It's a big pipe.
Thanks.
Jim, so can you just, I mean, there's nothing to respond to now, but can you just get a note out and just try to make sure that it's showing essentially it'll be up for board approval after all the selection process, but it didn't seem to be a lot of time to kind of sort of inform based on the schedule that are already that was put up. So we've got a June meeting and a July meeting of the board, and it looks like the contractor selection comes sometimes after the June board meeting and sometimes before the July meeting with the expected approval in July. Just be just be mindful of kind of sort of whether or not we need to kind of give people a heads up. And the reason I say that is we've had a $500,000 movement in pricing pretty quickly. And if we come out, if we're expecting a $5 million budget and it shows up at 7.5, right, that'll probably create some questions. Now, hopefully it's 5 or lower, as Mike pointed out, but just want to make sure we just don't get caught out there asking a lot of questions at the last minute.
Got it. If there's a swing like that, we'll let everybody know.
That is certainly something that we're going to be evaluating with the engineering team before we would bring it to you, because we don't want that, just as much as you don't want to see that. So we're certainly putting our effort in to make sure that we cut the cost.
Can you
Yeah.
Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, before we close, I just have one request. So if you have questions on this, but before we close this meeting, I have a quick request.
Okay. Jim, my question for you is, can you let us know where the MDHA reserve fund stands at this point?
I don't have it at hand. We were going to cover that with mid-year at the next meeting, but I can certainly give you an update. They've more than covered this. We've been planning for this for 2 years. So this is covered comfortably. And I'll give you an update. I'll just take that for the record and give you a detail where we stand now. Okay.
That would be great. And it's fine if you address it when we're reviewing the financials at the next meeting. I think it would also be helpful if you could just let us understand how we are refurbishing that reserve fund and at what pace, so that we can anticipate when we have to move to phase 2 that we'll be ready for it. Or if we have challenges on that front.
Certainly, and that's part of the one of the tasks from the retreat is the overall Casey presentation on development, especially as you get farther in the future. Much of this is dependent on assumptions that we would achieve certain things, including predictive analysis of our cash flow. But the cash flow is stabilizing. We have a pretty good analysis of that. The unknowns are some of the other decisions the board has to make. So we'll have that. Certainly have where we are now. And generally, I have it right here with me. I've got our current financials, but not the bathtub chart. I don't think. Let me look real quick. We call it the bathtub chart.
That's completely fine. Just my request is presented at the next meeting, so that's great. Okay.
Yeah, just quick request at last week's first half of our Finance and Development Committee meeting, when we heard a presentation by Carol Naughton. I got in the board packet a hard copy of her slide deck, and I'd like to have the electronic version. Could you send that out? Can you email that to us?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I thought I had. I know did any of the other board members get it? She sent it to us, and that day I think I spammed it out. So I'll send it.
I think you've got Kay has a new email address. I think that's part of the problem.
Okay, I use the MDHA commissioners, the global. Yeah, I'll send it to you, Kay. I'll have it to you in a second.
That's it.
Okay, wonderful. So with additional business, I actually did want to ask the commissioners, since Carol Naughton's presentation was so informative and dense, if you all had any additional comments or thoughts after the presentation, some time to think about it, that you'd like to share or put on the table.
Well, I will. I thought her presentation was excellent. It was so thorough and comprehensive. I think part of the key to the success of that is going directly to the people that lived in that community at that time, and working so closely with them to determine what they felt was best and what the needs were. It's obviously seems to me to be a great success. I know Warren Buffett got so he didn't throw as many behind things that he doesn't think will be successful. In terms of neighborhoods of, I guess, Emily, what I might call mixed opportunities where you have a mixture of both rental and home ownership. I sure hope in other projects that people will be able to go back and live and own homes in those neighborhoods in the future. But if there's a site visit, count me in.
Thank you for that, Kay. Yeah, I think that obviously I'm biased as the person who represents community land trust and shared equity homeownership, but the homeownership component really, I think, spoke to me as well to address that in the surrounding community, if at all possible. I also thought that, one question I had for you, Jim, is part of the reason why we are a purpose-built prospect, because we have a community quarterback in our plan as they kind of define and envision it?
Well, our goal is to learn from purpose-built. I would say not exactly replicated. So as an example, one area that we're not precise in their model, we have committed not to disadvantage our residents by issuing vouchers and putting them off site, which constrains us to a path and pace that doesn't marry up precisely with the purpose-built model. As one differential, I'm not saying one's better than the other, but for us, at least in previous discussions, it's about the residents and taking care of them and putting them off site. And this, until the market changes dramatically for our voucher placement, we don't have a good opportunity to do that. And because of that, we will be slower. And so that pace is one where we're not completely in line. Community quarterback certainly is another. And a third, to a degree, is scope. They're at 650 and we're going to be 3 times that. So there's a little bit of scope. There may be things that we do in a different way in a larger setting that they don't do in a smaller. And I think the last would be that we are self-developing, which is a model that has advantages and potentially disadvantages. So those are the 4 major areas. How you handle tenant relations in terms of vouchers, the development model itself in terms of self-development with a skilled internal team as opposed to outsourcing to the maximum extent possible, including outsourcing of maintenance and property management capacity. Community quarterback is in there as well, and then scope. That's probably the big 4. That doesn't mean that they're good or just that they're different, and because that we not fully embraced into their setup, and we're listed as a prospect on their map, not as I'm not sure what the next step is, but we're not listed as a full member. We get to draw the information we need from them. She and I are great friends. I talk to her frequently. Obviously get great ideas and things that look and fit well here. We adopt them, and those that like community quarterback, we'll keep working on that. But others, like not issuing 1,000 vouchers to put all the population off quickly, is one that we haven't done. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, Jim.
So yeah. Are the other purpose-built communities following that precise models, the ones in other parts of the nation?
Again, I'd have to go back and look. I think, and that's really a great question for Carol, not for me, but every property, every site is different, and so none are exactly like. She brought up Spartanburg, for example. It has differentials from what they're doing. One major differential, and certainly advantage there, is Tom Cousins. Not all of them have a Tom Cousins. Certainly we do not yet. We're still looking and hope to find someone. But I would say there's none that's precisely exactly like purpose-built. And I'm not saying that we haven't been accepted because of any antagonism or lack of alignment, but they're big pieces. Now, one that we are perfectly aligned with, commitment to education, right? So all of these have a commitment to education and breaking the cycle of poverty in one generation, which our commitment's fully demonstrated by the courage of your board member, this board and previous boards, to the significant commitment to the Explore School and us tracking. It's about 60% of low income and about 40% thus far of Casey, tracking that. But if we didn't have, for example, some track on education, we wouldn't even qualify as a prospect. So there's certain pieces in there we fit perfectly. Just I'm sure there are other communities in the country that fit very closely in certain areas and probably in other areas do not.
Thank you.
So Jim, so I want to kind of come back to Emily's question a little bit. And so one of I think the differentiators between what was happening in Atlanta and what's happening here is that they were essentially only focused on one community, right? So they were essentially only focused on what is our equivalent of Casey or Edge Hill or Napier, right? And so they really focused on a single project in Atlanta where we're focusing across their entire portfolio. And so I think they have some advantages of focusing on a single site. Then also, I think there are opportunities for us because we do have so many sites, Jim, that we seem to be, I hear being communicated that we're focused on one internal self-development model. We'll never make any changes to the way we want to do this because that's what we said 6 years ago. But because we're pursuing so many large sites that we can have an impact, one of the things I'd be very interested to try to understand from you, Jim, is what would change your mind, right? What would change our approach to Tuticum or to Edge Hill or to Napier, right? That's what I'm really trying to understand because I think we actually have a chance to do it the way that we laid it out the first time at KC, understand what lessons learned or what constraints now may be available or may be upon us as an organization to move through the future projects and really get a sense of how and when we might be flexible in approaching projects in different ways. And I don't think that I'm requesting an answer at this very specific moment. But I do feel like is that there, I think in any good organization, we say we have a path and we have a plan. We go hit it and we learn new stuff. Is this the way we continue to do this? Or what would it take for us to change our mind about going down the path we're on? I think we need to engage in that conversation as a board and with your executive team over the coming months.
Certainly that was a task that came out of the retreat, and we'll schedule that in as we can. The COVID's really eaten up a lot of time, and I think we probably would have proceeded on that at a more rapid pace. Right now, and I'm not saying we're going to defer on it. It's certainly one of our strategic questions. It's probably maybe it's certainly among the most important, if not the most important. And we've just we've got to get through this COVID business successfully. While I think, as you can appreciate from the COVID presentation Thursday, just maintaining current operations while protecting the residents and protecting the staff, which none of us even thought about at the retreat. We didn't have any idea, right? Had no idea. That's eating up a lot of bandwidth. Now, the good news is not missing a beat. All of our current ops, great. Finance is solid. Development continues. But placing staff time into that would be at the expense of, as an example, working out a testing program on the fly with national, state, and local agencies. That's where our additional bandwidth that I would strategically be placing in that. But we'll certainly got the question, understand it, and it is a vital one, and I appreciate the board bringing it up.
Thank you.
So can I introduce one more piece of final business or additional business? Is that the section we're on? At some point, and hopefully in this next meeting, can we try to understand where we are with CWA and looking at what are those opportunities and how we may proceed with going on with that? I mean, we probably talked about it 4 or 5, 6 months ago. It's kind of a presentation of this is what we have, but really just getting a sense of what progress are we making or not, if that's where we are over this period towards trying to figure out how do we maximize the value out of those sites to kind of sort of continue to reinvest in our Envision program. I like to kind of sort of have that surface in future meetings as your time and as the staff's time permits.
Spot on, Aoli. And as you and I've talked many times, CWA 1 and 2 is probably the next major part of the Envision Casey recapitalization plan. I'd hope to bring that to you with the whole plan and the details we know, then the assumption we're making, and what we have as projections. And within that, CWA 1 and 2 is the next big one. I mean, there's no doubt. And we've had approaches that are ready to go that we've sort of held off on because I didn't want to get ahead of the board and wanted, from the retreat, want to be able to tell the board, here's kind of how we see the land laying out to get Casey done. We've held up our planning on the other envisioned developments across the city. We hit the pause button on those based on the retreat, and want to come back to you with the Casey plan, and a subset of that certainly is CWA 1 and 2, and a very important one.
All right, thank you. So with that, we have 2 minutes to spare. So let's adjourn this meeting and we will reconvene at 11:30.